All right, so yeah, I'm going to be speaking about keeping your product or project manager or owner productive. A very sexy, exciting topic. Myself, I started out life as a web developer and gradually moved into DevOps. And that's what I do today. I'm our DevOps practice lead, which means I go into companies and I give them advice about how to get their development and operations teams working together better. That usually also involves InfoSec and QA and other people. I also founded a little site called DevOpsDictionary.com, which if you're ever wondering what in the world a snowflake or a goat or a donkey is, you can go there and find out. Yeah, the other big important bit is that picture there is a mosaic made out of Lego. And it was a wedding gift to my wife, from me. So, we are dorks. All right, so I'm going to make some assumptions here in the conversation about product and operations that may or may not apply to your company. But we can all sort of modulo in your head to make it work for you. So I'm going to assume that your company at some point tried Agile with a big capital A, and you had some measure of success, and it was adopted, inconsistently within your organization. It's probably a locally modified version of Agile at this point. I'll also assume that the product team is on the executive track, by which I mean that different from the development or QA or operations groups, someone who is on the product team is expected to go into the executive branch eventually, be a director, manager, that sort of thing. Whereas your typical individual contributor on the development or operations groups, that's not necessarily their expected future. So people have different expectations about themselves in these groups. And then just generally, I'm assuming as a DevOps consultant that the friction between dev and ops is decreasing within your organization because DevOps is totally the solution to everything and it's taking the world by storm, right? I'm also assuming that engineering and product friction is not improving. As this is sometimes phrased as business and IT are not yet aligned. And that's been a problem for decades. So a quick show of hands, and just to be clear, you can raise your hands multiple times. How many of you would describe yourselves primarily as a developer? Well, that's a fair number, all right. And how many as operations of any stripe? About the same, that's pretty impressive. And how many management? Primarily management, wow. Seriously, I thought this talk would get no traction because I thought there would be no management in the audience. So I'm psyched. I'm also realizing, yeah, okay, good. I hope I don't say anything too mean. Anyway, moving on. So here's how it works in the ideal world, that there's the product team, the development team, operations team, they all pull in the same direction, and profit results for the business. Hooray! Everybody gets gigantic piles of cash and universal acclaim. If that all happened just like this, and I don't think org charts are actually additive this way, it would all be stress-forward and stress-free. But instead, we have people screaming at each other at work, and the business is struggling to execute. So how did we get to this point? So software products are often created by 4 separate teams. Product, which identifies a market opportunity and defines the requirements. Development, which implements those requirements into software. QA, which then tests the software to make sure it does what it says on the box, and operations, which then publishes and runs the software, and also ensures that the software is available. Today, that often means something like keeping the web service or the website available and running. So this diagram shows the bad old days, up to about the late 1990s, in which product would make a complete huge definition of a product, throw it over the wall to development, and then by the time development finished with it, the market would often have shifted away from the definition. This approach is known as the waterfall approach and was the dominant software development approach in the pre-internet days. It works really great for shrink-wrap software, but times have changed, and most software is delivered as a service and has to be much faster. So some very smart people got together and figured out that if product and development worked together more closely and iterated very quickly using many short feedback cycles, they might be able to get to market faster with something that more closely matched customer needs. This was called Agile, and it worked generally pretty well, kind of. Agile sped up feature delivery dramatically. Now remember, it usually isn't about building a better product. It's usually about building a good enough product faster than your competitors. first one to market usually wins, and Agile really helps with that. So we knock down a wall, and it's replaced with a little green happy arrow instead of a red bad arrow, and there's little hearts floating around. That looks good. Let's try to turn another brick wall into floaty hearts. Okay, between dev and QA. Testing is very amenable to automation. So instead of having a bunch of humans do all the tests all the time, what if we had the machines do the tests? And then if the machines can do the tests, we can do the tests as often as we like and as early as we like. So people started doing this. Developers were able to run the tests early before they handed them off to QA. That way the developer would find the problem as soon as possible, fix it before they had to waste anybody's time. This means that QA is now free to spend their time on more important human tasks, like writing the automated tests, identifying new failure modes, and performing the tests that only a human can actually do. That all sounds great, man. Love and hugs throughout. Everything's getting closer to perfect, so let's try to knock down that last brick wall. All right, so this one, the thing shifts a little bit because the feedback cycle's a little bit different here, but if we can get dev and ops talking together a little bit better, you can get a cycle that looks something like this. Because there are lots of parts of the deployment that can be automated, like spinning up new instances, pushing code to them, that sort of thing. Why not have the developers start looking into that sort of thing and automating it themselves? This also puts the developer in the position of understanding exactly what it takes to deploy and run software. So they start thinking like ops people, and ops people start saying to devs, hey, we understand each other a lot better. Our pain can start to go away. Now, everyone in this room has had some exposure to DevOps at this point, I assume, right? Probably. And this works to a limited degree. It works better in some cases and worse in some others, and it depends on how you go about it. You got to have a lot of empathy and a lot of trust and that sort of thing. So, I'm not going to be talking about DevOps today, though. I am going to be talking, though, about that little blue arrow down at the bottom. There's a lot of hearts and happiness on this diagram. There's no more red brick walls. But there's still a problem here. There's a brick wall between ops and product. There's no direct way for feedback to get from the ops team back to product. Now remember, product is the one who's defining what we're doing. So if ops finds a problem and says, this is a problem that needs to be addressed, the only people they can really take it to at this point is to the developers. And the developers say, yeah, we should do that. That's totally a problem, man. But I've got all these features I have to implement, that sort of thing. It's not a good position for a developer to have to be your advocate like that. You're also relying on there being 2 layers of engineers that are very skilled communicators. Yeah, I know. I mean, that's a rare bird anyway. So anyway, operability issues have no real champion. How are they going to get on the sprint? And even if they did get brought to product's attention, how can they be communicated in a way that actually gets traction? How do you get traction with product? I mean, who even are these people, right? So typically product is represented on a team directly by a role known as the product owner. I'm going to be abbreviating it throughout this talk as a PO, because that's often how they're referred to. But you may hear a different word for that. You may hear it like a product manager, or a customer advocate, or the front-end evangelist, all kinds of wacky terms for it. But basically it means the person who knows what the business wants out of the project. This is the person who has the business's deepest understanding of what the market's needs are and the solution that the business is going to use to get there. Often seen nearby and related to the PO is the PM, the project manager. So this is the person that is mostly concerned about scheduling resources, making sure that there is a plan, and is mainly concerned about cost. So they're worried about our burn rate, they're worried about finding new people, they're worried about ramp up and that sort of stuff. On a lot of projects, especially at smaller places, you'll find that these 2 roles are conflated, that you'll have someone who is acting both as a PO and a PM. Now that can work, but there is a serious conflict of interest there, because the PO is interested in delivering features, making things bigger, that sort of thing, whereas the PM tends to have a downward pressure. They're trying to contain costs, deliver on time for the least money. It's tough to be the same person doing that. So, how many of you out here have felt this way before? I know I have. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that they are not, in fact, ogres. I think that we should try to reach out a little bit more, think about empathy. especially between groups, with CI and with DevOps, we saw a lot of the positive impact there stemmed from empathy, from the human beings involved in the teams reaching out to each other and saying, hey, how can we reduce the amount of noise and stress between our teams so that we can actually focus on doing our jobs instead of just making more work for each other? So we have to reach out and understand each other. So let's try to understand a PO, let's try to understand a PM, and let's try to understand their conflicts and then build some bridges between them. So a PO. A PO often comes from a non-technical background, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I'll get into that a little bit more. But a PO is often in the position of having to defend themselves to the customer, whether that's the business or an actual external customer. A PO has to defend the technical decisions of the team to someone who's mad at them, and this individual themselves does not have a deep technical grasp of why it had to happen. So that's a terrible, terrible position to be in. We had, the feature is going to be late because we had to refrobulate the dubulator. And the customer's like, I don't care about the refrobulation. Like, well, I don't know how to go deeper into that and say why it's important, but we had to. So you'll also find that POs are judged on outcomes that they cannot control. And that's one of those instances in which they are. Software development is a notoriously risky and hard to estimate process. And a PO is the person who is most accountable on the team. If the project goes under, the developers, the operations people, all those sorts of people, they'll probably stay on, assuming the business is okay. They'll, hey, what's the next development project, that sort of thing. A PO who screws up, heads roll, man. That's what happens. They, or they're asked to leave quietly, that sort of thing. So that ends up with an interesting situation. Now, I also mentioned earlier that the product team tends to be on the executive track. So if you succeed on a project, if you really do a stellar good job, there's a pretty good chance you'll get promoted out of it and start climbing that ladder up into the executive ranks. So that means if you are a PO and things go well, you leave upwards. And if things go badly, you leave downwards. So that means that there are very few experienced POs because most of the POs you are working with, it's their first project. So that means, through no fault of their own, that you are dealing with someone who doesn't know what they're doing because they are inexperienced. And so that's a bit of empathy there. You have to realize they're coming at it from an angle in which they've never done it before, and that's okay. You can't hate them for that. That's just the position they're in. A PM, and my favorite PM in the world is in the audience right now. That's Pat. He's the guy who introduced us. So I really hope you like this slide, Pat. Most of it doesn't apply to you. But PMs usually come from a PM, again, as a project manager. This is the person who's more interested in the costs and dealing with the schedule. These people tend to come from a quantitative or financial background. A lot of them that I have met have this mentality of, we have to make a plan, we're going to plan out the work, and then we are going to work the plan. Once we've got the plan in hand, we are going to do what it says on the plan, and that's how we're going to succeed. A lot of PMs walk in the door with what's known as a PMP certification. Unlike a lot of other individuals, you may have 0 certifications. I don't have any. I've succeeded, and I don't have any certs. But project managers almost always have some kind of certification, and it's usually PMP. Now, the thing is that PMP typically trains people in waterfall, which, if you go back several slides, we'll remember is the worst way of doing this. And PMP is also typically focused on, it's very broad. It can train you to build skyscrapers or to manage business initiatives, that sort of thing. It can train you for lots of different things. So a lot of PMs in a company will be working on a whole bunch of different stuff, like go open the Tallahassee office, Bob. Hey, Bob, you did a great job opening the Tallahassee office. I got another project for you to manage. It's setting up this new website with this development team. Can't be too different, can it? Of course it's different. We all think it's different anyway, don't we? Anyway, so life as a PM or a PO. It's kind of bad. It's lonely. It's lonely because you are a person in a room full of people who do not like you or respect you. And I say that they don't like you or respect you because here in the IT industry, we like to tell ourselves that we are a meritocracy, but we're a meritocracy based around technical merit. So if you're in the room and you're the non-technical person, it may be really hard for you to get respect and to be listened to and liked. You end up feeling lonely. And of course you're afraid, because you are far more accountable for the success or failure of the project than anyone else. And that makes you stressed out. Now, are miserable, stressed out people fun to work with? No, they're awful. And they also make bad decisions. So, again, it comes back down to empathy. We have to reach out to these people so that we can help and support them make good decisions. So I have found that these are sort of the 4 biggest pieces in the wall between ops and product. There's no common language. We don't know how to talk about things to each other. One of us is very technical, one of us is very non-technical. It's also very hard to plan for emergent work, which drives the PM absolutely batty. And PMs and POs have this belief that operations can't estimate anything. And finally, the PO thinks that ops isn't customer-driven. Now, I've presented all of these from the PM or PO's perspective, so if any of these are worded in a way that raises your hackles or doesn't even fit on the screen. The last one says ops isn't customer-driven. Sorry, I just noticed that. I hope I don't have anything else that low. Anyway, so, all right, this is probably the #1 source of friction and alienation in the common language issue. You know, the PO or the PM, they just don't understand any of these technical issues about, you know, the load balancer, we need to have more redundancy, that sort of thing. The PO and the PM think these people are just speaking in technobabble. Both sides just feel misunderstood. Another way of putting it is that when you hear someone else speaking a language that you don't understand, like, you know, we really have to improve our velocity here, our burn down rate just looks awful, we have to really improve. And you're like, what? I don't care, man. You know, I don't care about all this stuff. Let me go back to work on the scripting. I need to frickin' finish this stuff. Both sides just feel like you're not from my tribe. You are some other thing that I don't want to deal with. So, I don't know what that was. We need to stop saying non-technical in a sneering voice, all right? I want to emphasize that again. We need to stop saying non-technical in a sneering voice. We all have skill sets that come into play in the innovation process. I mean, take a big step back. Our real goal is to make something that people want to pay money to experience. No one here knows the details of that need better than the PO. And a good one knows how to express it. Now, I'm an engineer at heart. I love the craftsmanship of code. I love the craftsmanship of making something work, of making it as simple as possible, of stripping away all the excess complexity. And when I've done that, I feel great. And when a PO comes along and says, hey, we got these changes in from the customer, they want a different feature now, that's all irrelevant, you can throw it away. Even worse is when they say, hey, we got this change request from the customer, they still want that feature, but then we want it to work this other way, and we don't have time to do it right, so you're just gonna really have to mutilate it, make it really ugly. And that just burns me even more. So that's what I'm referring to here as the workmanship bias. And that's why engineers need an outside perspective, because all of that frustration that I'm feeling is actually healthy. It is healthy because I do want to make good quality software that's well crafted, but at the same time, the frustrating magic of the Agile process is that we are pivoting whenever we find out new customer changes. We thrive on change, we respond to change. If I were to go along and continue building my clean, perfect design, I would be building the wrong thing. That is the wrong thing, that is not what the customer needs. And the customer finds out more about what they need as we go along. All right, finally, I want to mention here that POs can do things that engineers can't. They understand the business. They have domain knowledge of the business, whether it's thumbtacks or shoes or whatever. They understand that sort of thing far better than the engineers will. And they know how to balance the trade-offs among them. They're also a lot better at soft skills, typically. You know, the listening and the people skills and the patience and all that. I've highlighted that in blue, though, because we all should be working on that. This is something that everyone can thrive on. Any engineer that is really technically skilled, but then also adds those to themselves, will be very successful, because you'll be able to reach out, you'll be persuasive, you'll be able to get traction with people. So here's one way in which I have learned to build up trust with a PO or a PM. I call it the vocab corner. And it's a simple idea. I'm speaking here to an individual contributor. As an individual contributor, an engineer, ops or dev or whatever, set up a one-on-one weekly meeting with your PO or your PM. just one-on-one over Skype or in the same room together, whatever. It doesn't have to be long, 15, 30 minutes. 30 minutes is probably a bit much. But the idea is to open up a regular back channel and to just start having conversations about stuff and ask questions. Be like, you talk a lot about, the burn down chart. What is that? Have them explain it to you in their words as they use it. Maybe you know what a burn down chart is. But you know what? I've consulted with maybe 20 different places that say they're Agile, and I've never seen that used the same way. It's amazing. So get their understanding of what they're doing, and at the same time, offer yourself up. Offer yourself up as a way of getting terminology back into them, and have low expectations. You're not going to, make them into an AWS expert or whatever, and you don't need to. The idea is to build trust and be a resource. So, in that conversation, you might bring up, hey, I heard you use the word refactoring the other day, and you used it in a way that I haven't, that it usually isn't used. Usually, to me, refactoring means a change to software that results in an internal improvement. Perhaps it's faster or easier to extend or something like that, but it has no external change. It behaves just the same. So we would never use the word refactor to mean, adding a feature, for example, right? That kind of thing. Over time, you can help this person because everybody in the back of their mind has a little voice that says, man, I hope I don't say something stupid today. And you can help your PO in that way. You can help them build credibility with the rest of their team. You can be an ally. Now, this has a very, very powerful effect over time, and you have to stick with it, and you have to build that trust, to build that relationship. And there are two things that can perforate this in an instant. One of them is feigned surprise. If somebody says, if your PO says to you, I love having these conversations, and I wanted to ask you, what in the world is virtualization? I keep hearing that word, and I don't even know what it means. And if you say back to them, how can you not know what virtualization means? How can you not know that? Oh my gosh, that's terrible. You're shaming them. You're putting them in a position of mocking their ignorance. And everybody has ignorance. Everybody has massive patches of things that they simply don't know. Even worse, everybody has massive patches of things that they think they know, but are actually misperceptions. Everybody has that. You're in the room to help build those bridges over it. And then the other big thing is don't gossip afterwards. Don't ever come out of that room and go talk to somebody and say, hey, Bob over there doesn't know anything about virtualization. Didn't even know what it was. He thought it was a kind of chicken. So it's very important to treat the respect that you build as being precious. All right. The next big conflict point between ops and production, or ops and product, there are a lot of conflict points between ops and production. But anyway, revolves around unexpected work. In other words, you'll be in a situation here where the dev and the ops people, the engineers all know that you can't plan out every single detail. And the PO and the PM are in the position of yeah, we did plan out every detail. We grabbed a bunch of stuff off of the backlog. We have a typical velocity of 90 points a sprint, and we booked 90 points a sprint. That's what we're committed to. At the end of the sprint, I expect us to have completed 90 points. And that just never happens. And then there's frustration. The PO thinks, my team is failing. Either they're not meeting their goals, or they're switching up the tasks halfway through. There's all this frustration around it. Nobody understands where the work is coming from or who gets to commit to it. People feel out of control and frustrated. And if a team is too dictatorial, which is one of the responses to this, that the PO will say, nope, I'm the only one who gets to approve work. I'm the only one who gets to say whether or not we're doing something. If you want to do something, you got to come through me. And it becomes a big hassle. Then oftentimes engineers will go rogue. And if something breaks and it really does have to be fixed, they'll just fix it anyway. It'll be dark, untracked work, which is bad for lots of reasons. Could be that the engineer will end up on their assigned work that you can actually see, and then they get in trouble, or else they start working late hours, and then you have burnout. So we have to find better ways. All right, so here's some quick overview of the types of work, and I have some nice pictures up here of The Goal and The Phoenix Project, both books that, who here has not heard of these books? Anybody? I shouldn't have done it that way. I should have said, who here has heard of it, because I don't want to call you out for being ignorant. It's okay. These are both good books. Some say that The Phoenix Project is sort of It's sort of the seed book of the DevOps movement. It talks a lot about software projects and that sort of thing. And it's definitely the spiritual heir to the goal. The goal is more about a factory setting and about flow through a factory and that sort of thing. The goal has aged not entirely perfectly, but they're both very good reads. And if you're interested in the types of work and how to prevent disruptions in the flow of product through any sort of process, they are awesome. All right. So planned work, you've got features. Yay, everybody wants to do a feature. You get a pat on your head. There's process improvement. That's great. Things work better. You get more capacity. Everybody is able to get things through the pipeline better. That's also good. Unplanned work, though, is where we're really gonna kind of focus on here. You got incidents, obviously. Incidents are when things blow up and you must do an immediate context switch. Emergent tasks are those that are discovered in the course of doing other kinds of work, like it could be an unintended consequence or a missed requirement, or maybe it's just the realities of running at scale jump out at you. Those sorts of things pop up. And then finally, rework. Rework is when you're handed something that you expected to be just fine and working, and it isn't. Like maybe you're in an organization where you have to make a request to get a VM provisioned, and you make a request, your VM is provisioned for you, you log into it, and it's running the wrong OS. And you have to ship it back to them. You have to say, nope, I needed something else. Or maybe it's got some change you can't make, like it's got the wrong network interface or wrong storage or something. So we're going to talk about how to reduce these things, but remember, all efforts to reduce unplanned work are really just efforts to try to convert unplanned work. They're trying to convert unplanned work into planned work at the expense of additional overhead. That may or may not be a big win, and that's for your product owner and project manager to decide. Most project managers will say, I would like to have a lot more predictability at the cost of some overhead. All right. So, to reduce the emergent work factor, especially around operability concerns, it's best to try to involve the operations team as early as possible, in the design phases especially, and then keep checking in. I'll touch a little bit more on that later. Regarding the checking in part, I would say the key moments are whenever a technology choice is made. And this is important across functions. So for example, you might have a team that's deciding what queuing technology to use. And the development team is batting around different solutions, blah, blah, blah. And hey, if the ops team has a seat at that table, the ops team can say, hey, you know what? We've been running RabbitMQ for 4 years. We know how to scale it. We know its warts. It is completely unsurprising. We have scripting and automation to stand up and tear down RabbitMQ. It's not a problem for us. You go with RabbitMQ, low risk, no problem, we can do it. If you choose anything else, and that's a valid choice, it's much higher risk. We have to expend effort to make sure that we know how to scale it, that we know how to do everything else that we have to do for RabbitMQ, and you also increase the toolset diversity that we also have to learn, which has a business cost. So, if you can talk about those things earlier and with more of the right people in the room, and to the development team, it may very well be arbitrary. They're like, I don't care what queue I use. We were just going to use this other wacky thing because I Googled and that was the first thing that came up. That actually, that really does happen. I'm sure. Anyway, and then finally, the last thing about tracking dependencies. This just amazes me, and I'm a bit of a tracking software nerd, as Pat can verify. It just boggles my mind that people use tools like Jira or Track or these sorts of things, and they don't track dependencies. So if you needed to have a VM that's running the front-end web server or whatever, if you need that, and it's split up into 2 tasks as provision the VM, set up the web server, and you don't create an interlink between them showing the dependency that one has to be completed before the other, that's still obvious to you as an engineer. You're looking at your tasks and what's going to be scheduled in the sprint and all that. That's totally obvious to you because you've got that context in your head. But to a PO or PM who's non-technical, that's not obvious. How is that obvious? If you make those links, not only do you communicate better to your PO or PM about that and allow them then to give you sane assignments, you also enable them to do things like do critical path analysis, which is where you can figure out, if we've got 6 weeks to do it, but we've got 8 weeks of tasks that must be done sequentially, we are not going to succeed. But we've still got 6 weeks to pivot. So that's great. You can make decisions a lot earlier. If you don't have that capability of doing critical path analysis, you may not realize you're not going to make it until the week before, and then everybody's hair is on fire. All right, so let's see, unplanned work. Rework. This type of unplanned work responds well to efforts to build out a build and deploy pipeline. It's all build CI. Everybody loves CI, right? I won't go into that too much, but the whole idea here is that we automate to reduce error. So if you, coming back to the provisioning of VM example, if that were, instead of having an email that you had to send to ask for a VM or something, if it was a web page and you choose your operating system from a drop-down box and hit go, and it goes and provisions something and it's all automated behind the scenes, Ops has automated themselves out of the process. The only person that can screw it up is you, and that's great. So by automating that, you can totally eliminate those errors. Of course, there aren't going to be, all processes aren't able to be automated, and also not all processes are worthwhile to automate. Another thing to do, of course, is to add testing upstream, so that in this case it could have been, hey, ops guys, once you provisioned the VM, actually check off the thing I requested this particular OS. If I don't know that you've checked it, I can't accept it. But what it really comes down to is reaching out and building trust with people. All right, finally, the last kind of unexpected work is incidents. We are at Surge. I'm not going to talk about incidents at all, because there are so many other talks about incidents and disaster porn and all that sort of thing. As a DevOps consultant, I will also say that, hey, if you want to try to reduce them, try to DevOps more or something. But anyway, I hope that you're picking up good ideas about how to try to reduce incidents at this conference. It's a good one for it. All right. Another big one, estimation. All right, so PMs in particular expect software development and the operations of them to be predictable, to be plannable, predictable, and we know that it simply isn't, especially the operational side. And POs and PMs think that it's not a matter of the work isn't predictable, or those that haven't had contact with software development often think it doesn't occur to them that the work is in and of itself unpredictable. But they think that they can't be trusted to give good estimates, or that they don't know how to give estimates, or that they're lazy or something. So they give bad estimates and things get ruined. So, and every engineer has been burned by this before. They end up feeling like they can't be held accountable or they can't control the outcomes for which they're accountable. And every engineer has been burned by it. They have a pressure to underestimate, and others end up, reacting in the opposite direction, feeling a pressure to overestimate, to protect themselves. And either of which makes the estimation worthless. So, and I'm just going to, as an aside here about Agile, I think it's important to point out here that in most shops I've worked with, story points are used as an estimate of effort and immediately treated as a commitment, which if anybody here is an Agile wonk, knows that that's not really how you're supposed to use them. They're supposed to be used as a sort of estimate of complexity with a unitless value. But you know what? I'm going to speak to the realities, which is that they are typically treated as a measure of estimate. So estimating work. First of all, there's the issue that operations staff, so when you're working on a mixed team and suddenly ops engineers find themselves on an Agile team and I have to do what every morning? I have to go to a stand-up and then there's a sprint. Why is my life divided into 2-week chunks suddenly? If you are that person, you will also find yourself having to do Agile estimation, doing story pointing, or playing what do you call it, point poker and that sort of stuff. And if you have literally never done this before, and you're being asked to do it, and you are not doing it well, you're being unsupported. One of the things about Agile is that you are supposed to have a coach. There's supposed to be people who know Agile and understand it within your organization. Ask for help. Say, you know what? I don't know what in the world I'm doing. I need somebody to take me aside and, hey, let's have a brown bag lunch and get all the ops engineers who are now doing Agile. Let's get them together and talk about story pointing. It's just a matter of, yes, that is a skill that you should have handed to you, I think. It's also something that you gain with experience as well. That over time you realize, okay, that really is a 3-point story or a 5-point story or that sort of thing. And you also were like, why is this Fibonacci? What is Fibonacci? Something about rabbits. All right. So yeah, now that I've said all that about Agile, I'm going to criticize Agile quite a bit. Agile, of course, tries to take every task and say we're going to put one number on it, the story point, so it has one input, and we're going to use that as the one output as well. That is the number that is going to be used by the PO and the PM to plan the work. So one input, one output. I have an applied mathematics degree, and I love to do modeling, and in terms of like mathematical modeling, not like, modeling. But the point is that this is a very bad way to model such a complex situation, because every time that you do this sort of modeling, you lose a lot of detail, and I think you're losing the wrong kinds of detail. Encoded in that one number is effort, risk, complexity, and variability, among other things. So, and even worse, these decisions are often made for you by the work modeling software, by the task tracker like Jira or whatever. So here's my personal favorite alternative to this, and this comes out of the Art of Software Estimation by Steve McConnell. It's a 1995 book that has held up very, very well. It provides about 25 different approaches to software modeling, and it also presents them in the context of each one of these is completely awful in a different way. Your goal in reading this book is to pick out the software estimation technique that is awful for you in a way that hurts you the least. The one that hurts me the least most of the time is the 3 estimate method. Very simply put, when you're estimating a task like task A, B, and C here, you give 3 numbers. You give a best case, a typical case, and a worst case. This has a tremendous psychological impact. So if you are one of those people that tends to underestimate because you get in trouble if you give the real number, if you're like, that's really an 8-hour task, but surely he's going to bite my head off if I tell her it'll take a day, so I'll tell her it's a 2-hour task. Well, now you've got an outlet for that. You can say, well, hey, if things go really, really well, it could take 2 hours. Never going to take 2 hours. But you have a spot for that. Likewise, there's the worst case scenario. You're able to express that, you know what, things might just go right, but then again, the disks might fall off, and everything else can go wrong, and network is down, and AWS is on fire, and everything else goes wrong, and we can't find Bob who knows how to redo all this stuff because Bob's in Tahiti. All of those things could go wrong. Put in a number for it. Excellent. Now, if you're a project manager, you're thinking to yourself, oh my gosh, I can't work with 3 numbers. I have to be able to work with this somehow. Well, great. Here's a way to summarize it. Use a weighted average. And you can use a different weighted average based on your team. I like 1, 4, 1. So in other words, you take 1 part of the best case, 4 parts of the typical case, and 1 part of the worst case. Take them all together, weighted average, and you can see the different numbers that come out. I call that number the expected case. And that's a number that we would be actually rather surprised if the task ended up taking 6.5 hours, but it is a good number that you could use to schedule and estimate around. You know that there's going to be some variability around it. But speaking of variability, you get another number if you want it, and you do. You get the risk index. If you want, oh man, the formula's not on here. Well, approach me afterwards and I will give you mathematical formulas. If you take 1 and subtract from it 1 over the worst, or a typical over worst, you end up with this. And there are other ways of calculating a risk index. But the point is that this is a number between 0 and 1. And if it is 0, yeah, do it. It's going to come in exactly as estimated. And if it's 1, oh my gosh, run screaming from this task because you have no idea how long it's going to take. You should spike this, in other words, if you are an agile person who's into spiking. You can then use these numbers to do things in a flexible, extensible task tracking system. You could use these numbers to do things like highlight high-risk tasks, for example. You could say this is a red task, this is a green task, that sort of thing. And the ideal time to show off something like this is in your one-on-one time with your PM. Waka waka. All right. Finally, the biggest one, the conflict point around operational needs. Operations says every service we deploy needs to be scalable, monitorable, securable, all these other operabilities. There's so many different things that go into making a runnable product. It has to basically be operable. But from the PO's perspective especially, the PO never heard any of those requests coming from the customer. Things like monitoring, it's like the customer never asked for monitoring. I'm not going to allocate time to building monitoring. That sounds like a giant chore. It doesn't result in features. It doesn't result in me looking good. It's not an incentive I have. And then later, once it's in production, then why are we being hit with these outages? Why don't we see any of these things coming? because you don't have monitoring. Not that monitoring is going to prevent an outage necessarily, but hey, at least you know about it 10 minutes in advance. The point is that operational needs are not considered until too late. Remember that all of products' incentives are organized around satisfying the direct, explicit needs of the customer. In the engineer's mind, adding redundancy and in order to ensure availability is a clear customer requirement, right? Because if the site's down, the customer is not satisfied. But that's not necessarily obvious to the PO. So, did that picture come through at all? All right. So you should consider operational deployed, the needs of the deployed system as early as possible. The two major suggestions that I have for helping operations get more traction with product here are first tactical and strategic. So here's all the tactical ones. If you're an individual contributor, there is some hope that you would be able to do something like some of the things on this page. So first of all, early operational consults. Leverage those one-on-ones, And I would even say go beyond that, outside of your team. If you've ever heard the term be a goat, be someone who disrespects organizational boundaries to a certain extent. Go out there, if your ear's to the ground and you hear that there's a new software project coming along, and nobody on your team has any contact on it, nobody in the operations group has had any contact with it, maybe show up at one of their meetings, or maybe just approach one of the people. Showing up at a meeting might be a little bit organizationally rough, but just make yourself available. Say, hey, I hear you guys are working on some new thing, What's that going to look like? Anything we should be talking about? I know it's not going to hit production for another 12 months, but we could start talking about these things. I could help your developers get a good running start, that sort of thing. Get those conversations going early. Another big important point here, though, is that the whole team should be able to add missed stories, okay? So this is something that comes back to the dictatorial PO. If a PO thinks that, and largely this comes from bad incentives. I've worked with companies in which the product owner's incentives are all built around something like their backlog size. And for those unfamiliar, the backlog is the list of tasks that you know that exist, but you have not committed to yet. So you might be punished for having a whole bunch of stuff. Some people think of it as being tech debt. It's not quite that, but it's very similar. So, or having a bad backlog to active sprint ratio or something like that. And so because of that, you will have POs who say, well, I'm the only one who's allowed to modify the backlog. Because if anybody is adding things to the backlog and it ends up being 200 items long, I look terrible, and my boss is going to yell at me, and I'm not going to get a bonus. And that's no fun. You don't want your PO to be in that position. Now, what needs to happen here is that you need to sit down with your PO and reach the understanding that perhaps we can have a secret backlog, a separate team backlog, or a different tracking tool or something like that, something that protects them from that burn. And that is a terrible, terrible suggestion I just gave. I want to make that clear. This is an organizational change that needs to happen at above the PO's level. Someone needs to talk to the VP of product or whoever this person is and say, you have a terrible incentive structure and a terrible incentive structure that is pathological. Maybe you can be that person as an individual contributor. I hope you're in an organization where you feel supported enough to do that. Anyway, long story short, if you have a situation where you can't add things to the backlog, you end up missing work, you end up having tasks that aren't done. If it's a hassle to get something on the backlog, sometimes it'll be done rogue, or even worse, well, if you can add things to the backlog, you have the positive thing where, oh, you know what, I just saw this, I'm just going to add it to the backlog for now, and then a healthy team will be reviewing that frequently in what's called backlog grooming, where you sit down and look at all your backlog tasks and say, hey, this is something we're going to do, hey, this is something we're not going to do. That's okay. You're not going to get everything you want, and the PO is able to look at a task and say, why is this something that's important to us? Understand the business risks up and down, have a whole team conversation about it, get all the perspectives, and then decide to do it or not do it. And you know what? If you don't do it, it was considered and we're not doing it. That's okay. Another big thing is to focus on deployed, working, runnable software. You may have heard this said before, that software has no value until it is in production. Now, POs often have incentives that do not reflect this. They have incentives that say things like, you are rewarded for getting features done and handed to QA. That's not where the incentive should be. The incentive should be in production and runnable. So, get it into production, but not only in production, but in an operable state. Because if it's not operable software, then it becomes a cost center for the business, because it takes so much work to keep a badly designed piece of software running that it becomes a cost center for the business. So, all right, and then finally, POs really understand SLAs. So whenever you have something like an operational concern like, hey, I think this, we should really have RabbitMQ in a cluster instead of only one throughout the entire enterprise that does literally everything, you should approach them about it, but approach them with data. It's important to approach them with data and speak in terms of the SLA and talk about the probabilities and that sort of thing. It can be hard to gather that data, but it's part of the work. If you don't approach them with data, then you're just being Chicken Little. You're saying the sky is falling. And product owners become immune very quickly to ops people saying, oh no, we've got to do this, we've got to do this, we've got to do this. Come at them with numbers and say, here's what could happen, here's how likely it would happen, here's the damage, here's your SLA. It's up to you. You're the PO, that's your decision. All right, so this is a bit more the strategic level of the problems between product and ops. All right, so this is a typical org chart for dev and ops. All right, you've got product way over there and ops way over here, and they're under separate VPs. If ops has a operability concern and they want to get it addressed by product, they need to route that request upwards through their VP, through a CTO, down through another VP, and into the product manager, and then into the team. Now, I'm not saying that's how the message actually needs to flow, but that's the lines of authority. And that has a lot more impact on channels that are open, because most of these executives are operating under the assumption that it is better to keep our group siloed so that they can focus on their work. And we don't want these cross-silo communications going on. Obviously, it'd be good to change that. So if you are someone in a position that can, say, let's have a reorg, and many of you are already doing this sort of thing, and it's cut off here. But anyway, the idea is that you have a cross-functional team where you've got, the front-end team, which has devs, QAs, SREs. This one has a DBA on it. Anybody here a front-end team with a DBA? I got you. All right. I was going to say that'd be a heck of a front end. I'd love to hear more about it. Anyway, so this makes it a lot easier for the ops people to have the ear of the PO. They are on the team. They see the problems coming up, that sort of thing. They work with the team daily. So if you're in a position where you can wave a magic wand, do it. And it can be tough to be a minority in this position where you're the only ops person on the team. Guilds are a great way of approaching this. Also cross-training so that you can do pager duty across each other, that sort of thing. But really, pagers should be handled vertically as well. All right. So coming to the end here, I would say that here's the joy of prod, dev, QA, ops. Over time, if you keep up these one-on-ones and respect each other, champion the ops needs, and maybe even do a reorg if you can gradually reach a positive relationship with your PO and your PM. Your work environment will become less stressful. You'll feel listened to. Operational needs can happen a lot more easily, a lot more early, that sort of thing. Now, it's a tough climb. Org change takes a long time. Culture change takes a long time. Have patience, have low expectations, and talk to each other. And then finally, one closing, completely unrelated thought. I just wanted to mention one other thing. I know there's a lot of operations engineers in the room here. If there's anybody here who's trying to make a transition from ops to DevOps, but is struggling with some of the software development aspects because you have to do a lot more, Git workflow and all that sort of thing, I just want to offer myself as a mentor. Hit me up on Twitter at Clinton C. Wolfe. I love to have conversations about next steps for a career from going from pure ops to DevOps, that sort of thing. Shoulder to cry on, ask me questions, all that sort of stuff. All right. Questions about the talk? An SLA is a service level agreement. It's like 5 nines. No, 4 nines. That sort of thing. Or 9 5s. Yes? Ah, right. Well, I would say, sit down with them and figure out what requirements they're working from. They've got something. They've had conversations either with an external client or if it's internal or whatever, but they have something. And whether it's a signed contract or not, maybe they don't, I don't know. If they don't have that, well, great, there's an opportunity. Ops knows what an SLA is typically, or knows what goes into one. You can sit down and work that out and say, we need to figure out, put a pin in it. Is 2 nines enough? Is 6 nines really what you need? That kind of stuff. I mean, those are crazy numbers, both of them. So nobody go out and do 6 nines or 2 for that matter. Questions?
You put a lot of emphasis on tribalism, essentially.
Yeah.
Is that basically what you see as the core of the problem?
Do you?
Or is it conflicting incentives?
Well, I mean, engineers and executives come from such different tracks of life, and yeah, basically it is a tribalism thing, and trying to get people, what I was trying to get at throughout where possible was to try to get people to drop their roles and to drop their perceptions of who they are. I'm a coder, man, this is what I do, I just want to be left alone and just code. I'm a human being and I work with other human beings. Try to reach across that divide, because you know what, especially in the one-on-ones, that's where it really comes down. That's like the biggest wrench of all the tools that I mentioned here. The one-on-ones is the biggest, most impactful one, because the incentives there are so positive that when you say to someone, hey, I can help you out, I can help you not be blindsided by these weird technical things that you're so afraid of. Hey, we're having a problem today, and your boss is going to hear about it tomorrow, and I can give you arms today, and I will be in the room with you to back you up. That's trust. That's awesome. That can bridge so many, oh, you got an MBA, and I never, I went to high school and I've been coding since I was 4, that sort of thing. That can bridge all that stuff. So, any other questions?
Do you have a book recommendation for the guilds, for that guild pattern?
Right. Not off the top of my head, but I should. Right. Well, how about that? Yeah. I would try that, because one of the elements of it, of course, is brown bag lunches, that sort of thing, and it kind of does get into that sort of bloggy attitude of hey, here's the experience we're having today at work, and here's how we run life. Blogs may be your best answer there. Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much.